All right, welcome to the podcast. Pastor JDO3 is the name of this podcast, and I am Johnny Ogletree III, and I am ecstatic about being able to spend these few moments with you over the next 15 minutes. I am hoping that we will have a dialogue that will challenge you and also push you towards life change. That is my hope with these few moments. Will be today in First Corinthians, the 6th chapter, verse 12. I'll read one verse, and then we will try to generate a dialogue that will make you think, and also hopefully they will make you respond. I want to hear from you. So even after listening or even during this podcast, you can reply to it by contacting me on any social media by using the hashtag. The name of this podcast is Pastor JDO3. And the hashtag that you can use to find me on any social media is hashtag Pastor JDO3. And I would love to hear from you in response to this podcast. This podcast is entitled We Have Rights. Hello, people. We have rights. I know. Uh, so, one of the things that was fascinating to me during this political season was the arguments over the rights that we have. Now, of course, we generally argue this from a standpoint of being American citizens and what rights we have as American citizens. But I do want you to know that when I think about rights, I am thinking solely and first and foremost about the rights that are given to us by our Creator, which then do affect the rights that we do have and we should be demanding and fighting for as citizens in a country, because these are rights that are given to us by our God, not solely by an entity or a country. And thus we fight for our rights. But one of the things that's really cool about this thing called rights is a power. An ability. It's what you can do. It's what you might do. It's what you have the potential to do, and it's what's lawful to you. Correct? Right? When you think about these rights, and I'm being very broad with this description, but one of the things that we have in this Western Christianity is that we are so concerned with rights that we often overlook righteousness. So the first thing that I said was, look, we are rights driven and not righteousness driven. So the question that we ask ourselves as believers, and I want to say as believers because most of us are thinking solely first as citizens or solely as citizens. But what I want you to understand is that you are a believer. So the question that you want to ask yourself is not what rights do I have as a citizen in a country, but what rights do I have as a believer, right? And then what are the requirements and the responsibilities that I have as a member of this kingdom citizenship that I have, right? And so what we do understand by looking at this verse that Paul writes is that you have the right to do anything. He's saying, look, uh, uh, God has given you free will. God has given you sound mind. God has given you the ability to think. God has given you the ability to reason. God has given you the ability to design and to make rules and to make boundaries. And God has given you the ability to process things and to analyze things, and you have control over your body because God has given us this mind, this brain, to be able to think and process things through. And Paul says, look, I'm not arguing with you, right? You do have rights, right? You do have the ability to do certain things. You do have an opportunity or a chance to try and to experience anything that your heart desires. But he says, look, I want you to be thinking further than your flesh. Now, I want to stop there because honestly, when you think about what you want to do, the thing that you are considering first is your flesh. You're saying, look, I think this would be fun. I think this would be a memorable experience. I want to know what that feels like. Everyone else says it feels a certain way. Boy, it would be nice to feel what that feels like. Right? And so you're thinking about what you want to do based upon what you've heard, what you think might happen, and what others or what you have felt before in the past, right? And so these are the things that are driving your decision. But Paul is saying, look, you do have the right to do all of these things, for most of these things, but I want you to consider this first. Is this beneficial to you? See, we have thoughts as American citizens, generally, is it's legal, so it must be right. Have you ever thought that? You look at something, you say, you know what? I don't know. Or maybe you feel like the Bible isn't clear on certain things, right? And so there's this quote unquote gray area that you kind of live in with your decision making, and you make these decisions based upon what you consider to be a gray area, which is most of the time not an area that is gray, but is an area that we're just unfamiliar with, and thus our wisdom and our knowledge and our experience and our maturity has not allowed us to get to a point where we have yet understanding about certain things. And so we exist in this gray area, right? Where they say ignorance is bliss, right? And so as long as you're ignorant, we feel like we cannot be held accountable for the things that we do not know. And so we live in this gray area oftentimes as believers. And so we also look at our country and we say, well, wow, the country says that this is legal. The country says that this is okay. The country has accepted this as a practice. The country has accepted this as a part of the culture. And so since the country has made this law and said that this is okay, then if it's legal, then it must be right, right? Because this is quote unquote a Christian nation, right? So if the country approves something, then it's legal, and so now it must be all right with Christ, correct? Isn't that really what we think? It's legal, so it must be right. Or I was talking to a friend just a while back, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to purchase a firearm. And I was talking to, I got a couple of buddies that have some firearms, and I asked my buddy, I said, well, man, why did you start purchasing firearms? And he said, you know what? I purchased a firearm because it's my right. And I was thinking, you know what? He's right. It really is his right to own a firearm. But the response actually bothered me. And the reason the response bothered me is because of this passage. I think that sometimes when it comes to our decision making, we're not asking what is righteous, what is just, what is true, what is spiritually beneficial to us, or what would even please the Lord. The thing that we think first is, if I have a right to do it, then I'll exercise my right to do the thing that I desire to do. Now, I know you're thinking, nah, it's not apples and apples, but it's pretty close, because I thought about our friend Eve and our friend Adam. You know what? They had rights too. Eve had a right just like you have a right. Adam had a right just like you have a right. And the reality is much like Adam and Eve had a right, you have a right. And just like Adam and Eve, most of us are using that right to eat from trees that do not bring forth righteousness. That's right. And too many of us continue to eat daily from trees because it is simply in reach, and not because it is the righteous thing to do, which would please our God. Look, just because it is right, people, doesn't mean that this is righteous. There's a fine line, is there? There are some things that are right by the law that are not righteous by God. And so we as believers have to be aware that our draw, our desire should be to please God more than it is to please our flesh or to even use the laws of a country or a club or a group or an organization to override the laws and the rules and the wisdom that our God has given us to function by. Paul says, look, I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. Isn't that powerful? A friend of mine, a fellow co-laborer in the gospel, we were talking one day, and he asked me a question out of the blue. I don't know why. He just said, "Man, have you ever been to a strip club?" And I was thinking, "Whoa, what kind of question is that?" And I will not document my answer. Won't document my answer. But what I did say was, "Well, have you?" And the gentleman replied. He says, "No." And I said, "Well, man, I applaud you for being so diligent and being so strong and being so disciplined and being so God honoring by not going to one of these establishments." And he said, "Yeah, but don't clap for me." Because he said the reason I have not gone is because I know that I would like it. Wow. What if we made decisions based upon what we knew we would enjoy? What if there was something about you, something about your decision making, something about what you decided to do, what you decided to participate in, where you decided to go, what you decided to drink, what you decided to eat, what you decided to smoke, what you decided or who you decided to lay down with, who you decided to entertain, and who you decided to abstain from? What if the thing that made your final decision was a decision to sway towards righteousness and not what you had a right to do? So, what he was saying is, my decision to go is not that I'm that righteous, but it's really that I am that prone to sin. And honestly, there are some things about me that I say, you know what? I wish that I had had that same logic, because had I not participated, had I not gone, had I not opened this door, had I not climbed at that window, had I not broken the seal, had I not opened the wrapper, had I not put in the combination, had I not put my key in the door, then maybe some of the struggles that I have and maybe some of the struggles that you have would not be an issue today. Could it be that you have been mastered by some things because you just had to explore the full range of your rights? Could it be the things that have mastered you and pinned you down and caused you problems and caused you to stumble and have been stumbling blocks for you this entire time is all because you were making decisions based upon what you had the right to do? Adam and Eve did the same thing. They had a right. God gave them free will. And they used that right to eat from the tree. And they invited separation from God into their life, as well as death into their life. Worse, Eve was not even aware that she would not be the first one, that Adam would not be the first one to experience death. It would actually be their son. The next generation would suffer because of the decision to use a right that did not lead to righteousness. We must be careful using our rights, lest they lead us away from freedom into a life of bondage. Hey, look, that's been our time today. And I want to challenge you, and I want to hear from you. But I want to challenge you about your decision making. what is at the root of it and what is at the end of it? Are you thinking about what you have a right to do right now? Or are you thinking about what decisions will lead you down the path of righteousness for his name's sake? Have you thinking and been honest about yourself and who you are, having sober judgment, understanding that these things are could be something that become a lifelong issue? Or do you think you're just so strong because you know the word and have a prayer life that you cannot be mastered by anything? Paul says this, you got a right to do it, but it may not be beneficial to you. You have a right to do it, but I would just assume and choose not to be mastered by anything. Hey, thank you for joining us today on this podcast. I do want to hear from you. Email me, Pastor Johnny at firstmet.org, or you can contact me by looking me up on any social media. Just use the hashtag PastorJDO3, and you will find all of my social connections out there. And I would love to hear from you with this podcast. This podcast also gives you the ability to reply back verbally. If you reply back verbally, I would love to respond back to you verbally on another podcast. Hey, we look forward to speaking with you in the future, and thank you for joining us today.